In March 2018, a crack appeared in the earth near the town of Maimahiu in Kenya's Rift Valley. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't subtle. Overnight, a fissure more than 15 meters deep and 20 meters wide tore through farmland, swallowed a section of highway, and rendered homes structurally unsound. Local residents awoke to find their land divided by a chasm that had not existed the day before. News outlets scrambled to capture the images. Scientists descended on the site with measuring equipment. The question on everyone's lips was simple but terrifying. Was this the beginning of something unstoppable? The crack in Kenya is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a geological process that has been unfolding for millions of years, accelerating incrementally, and steadily rewriting the future of an entire continent. Africa, the second largest landmass on the planet, is quite literally tearing itself apart. The East African Rift System, stretching over 3,000 kilometers from the Afar Triangle in Ethiopia down through Kenya, Tanzania, and into Mozambique, represents one of the most active continental rift zones on Earth. This is not speculation. This is not exaggeration. This is observable, measurable, undeniable reality. What happens when a continent splits? What does it mean for the tens of millions of people living along the fracture line? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what will the world map look like when this process completes? The answers lie buried in volcanic rock, ancient tectonic shifts, and the invisible forces churning beneath our feet. To understand how Africa is splitting, we must first understand what holds continents together in the first place. The Earth's lithosphere, the rigid outer shell of our planet, is not a single unbroken surface. It is divided into tectonic plates, enormous slabs of rock floating atop the semi-molten asthenosphere below. These plates are constantly moving, driven by convection currents in the mantle, the slow circulation of superheated rock that churns like a colossal engine beneath the crust. Where plates collide, mountains rise. Where they pull apart, rifts form. The East African Rift is a divergent boundary, a place where the African tectonic plate is being pulled apart from within. But this is not a clean, symmetrical break. The continent is fracturing along two distinct branches. The Eastern Rift cuts through Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania. The Western Rift runs along the border of the Democratic Republic of Congo, passing through Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and down to Lake Malawi. Between these two branches lies a massive microplate, a section of crust caught between two opposing forces. This microplate, known as the Somali Plate, is slowly drifting away from the rest of Africa at a rate of approximately 7 millimeters per year. 7 millimeters does not sound dramatic. It is less than the width of a pencil. But tectonic movement is measured not in years, but in epochs. Over 10 million years, 7 millimeters per year becomes 70 kilometers. Over 50 million years, it becomes an ocean. The process is not random. It follows a blueprint written in the deep mantle. Beneath the East African Rift lies a plume of superheated magma, a column of molten rock rising from near the Earth's core. This mantle plume is exerting enormous pressure on the crust above, pushing it upward and stretching it thin. As the crust stretches, it weakens. As it weakens, it fractures. And as it fractures, magma rises to fill the gaps, creating new volcanic systems and further destabilizing the region. The evidence is everywhere. The Afar Triangle in Ethiopia sits at the junction of three tectonic plates and is one of the most volcanically active regions on Earth. The Great Rift Valley, visible from space, is a scar running the length of East Africa, flanked by towering escarpments and dotted with volcanic peaks. Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, and the Virunga Mountains are all products of this rifting process. They are not ancient relics. They are active symptoms of a continent in the process of breaking. If this process continues uninterrupted, the outcome is inevitable. In approximately 50 to 100 million years, the East African Rift will widen into a full oceanic rift, and seawater from the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden will flood into the valley. A new ocean will be born, separating the Horn of Africa, including Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and parts of Ethiopia, from the rest of the continent. The Somali Plate will become a new landmass, an island continent drifting slowly eastward into the Indian Ocean. This is not speculation. This is the established geological trajectory based on observable data and well-understood tectonic mechanics. The Red Sea itself is proof of concept. 30 million years ago, the Arabian Peninsula was part of the African continent. Today, it is separated by a body of water over 300 kilometers wide in places. The Red Sea is a young ocean, still in the early stages of its expansion, and it was formed by the exact same rifting process currently tearing apart East Africa. The transformation will be gradual but relentless. As the rift widens, the land will subside. Volcanic activity will intensify. Earthquakes will become more frequent and more severe. The crack that appeared in Kenya in 2018 is not an anomaly. It is a preview. Over the coming millennia, similar fractures will open across the region, some shallow, some catastrophic. The ground will shift. Rivers will change course. Lakes will drain or expand. Entire ecosystems will be reshaped. But the geological transformation is only part of the story. The human cost is where the true weight of this process becomes impossible to ignore. Over 100 million people live directly within or adjacent to the East African Rift System. Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Malawi, Mozambique. These are not sparsely populated hinterlands. They are home to some of the fastest growing populations on the planet, cities expanding at unprecedented rates, and economies struggling to balance development with environmental fragility. What happens to these nations when the ground beneath them begins to split? The answer is complex, catastrophic, and already unfolding in slow motion. Infrastructure built on unstable ground becomes indefensible. Roads crack. Buildings tilt. Water systems rupture. In regions where poverty is already widespread and government resources are stretched thin, the additional burden of managing tectonic instability is overwhelming. The 2018 crack in Kenya destroyed homes and displaced families. But it also severed a critical highway, cutting off access to remote communities and disrupting supply chains. In a country where rural infrastructure is already fragile, a single geological event can trigger cascading failures. Now multiply that by centuries, by millennia. Ethiopia sits at the epicenter of the rift. The Afar Depression, one of the hottest and most inhospitable places on Earth, is already below sea level in places. As the rift widens, this region will be among the first to flood when seawater breaches the highlands. Coastal cities along the future ocean will face submersion. Inland cities will lose access to trade routes. Borders will become meaningless as the physical geography they were drawn upon ceases to exist. Tanzania and Kenya will see their eastern regions severed from the rest of the country. National identity, already fragile in nations carved by colonial borders, will face existential strain. How do you govern a country split by an ocean? How do you maintain economic coherence when half your territory is drifting away at 7 millimeters per year? The splitting of Africa is not just a geological event. It is a geopolitical earthquake in slow motion. Control of coastline, access to ocean trade routes, and ownership of newly exposed resources will become flashpoints for conflict. When a new ocean forms, new territorial waters will be defined. New exclusive economic zones will be drawn. New disputes will ignite. The Somali Plate, once separated, will become strategically critical. It will control access to shipping lanes between the Indian Ocean and the new African Sea. Nations that today share borders will become maritime rivals. Treaties signed on the assumption of stable geography will become obsolete. And all of this will unfold over timescales so long that no single government, no single generation, will be able to respond coherently. But there is another layer. Climate change is accelerating the observable effects of tectonic activity. Increased rainfall and flooding are already destabilizing land along the rift. Erosion is exposing deeper fractures. Landslides are becoming more frequent. While the continental split is driven by forces far beyond human influence, the surface impacts are being intensified by environmental degradation, deforestation, and unsustainable land use. The two crises are intertwined, each amplifying the other. The timeline is uncertain. 50 million years is the commonly cited estimate. but tectonic activity does not follow a schedule. Rift systems can accelerate. They can stall. They can reactivate after millions of years of dormancy. The East African rift could widen rapidly over the next few million years, or it could slow to a crawl. There are variables we do not yet understand, feedback loops we cannot model, and thresholds we have not identified. What we do know is that the process is irreversible. Once a rift reaches a certain stage, once enough magma has intruded into the crust, once the lithosphere has thinned beyond a critical point, the splitting cannot be stopped. Africa is past that point. The question is no longer if, but when, and how violently. Imagine a world map in 50 million years. The familiar outline of Africa, that boot-shaped silhouette children learn in geography class, will no longer exist. In its place will be two landmasses. The larger mass, still recognizable as Africa, will retain most of the western and central regions. The smaller mass, a new continent yet to be named, will drift eastward, carrying with it the Horn of Africa and fragments of the Rift Valley. Between them, a new ocean will stretch from the Red Sea in the north to Mozambique in the south, a body of water perhaps as wide as the Atlantic, perhaps narrower, but unquestionably real. New islands will rise where volcanic peaks once stood above the valley floor. New coastlines will form where deserts and savannas once dominated. The entire climate system of the region will shift. Ocean currents will change. Weather patterns will be rewritten. And humanity, in whatever form it exists 50 million years from now, will look back at maps from our era and marvel at how different the world once was. There is something unsettling about geological time. It operates on scales so vast that human civilization, all of recorded history, becomes a flicker. Empires rise and fall. Technologies advance and become obsolete. Languages are born, evolve, and die. And beneath it all, the earth moves, indifferent and inexorable. Africa is not breaking because of anything we did. It is breaking because that is what continents do. They drift. They collide. They fracture. They reshape themselves according to forces that predate life itself. We are not the architects of this process. We are merely its witnesses, living in a moment of transition so gradual that it can only be perceived through science, through measurement, through the patient accumulation of data across decades and centuries. But that does not make it irrelevant. The splitting of Africa is a reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not as solid as it seems. That borders are temporary. That nations are fragile constructs drawn on a canvas that is constantly being redrawn by forces far greater than politics or power. It is a humbling recognition that we are not separate from the planet. We are part of it, subject to its rhythms, vulnerable to its transformations. In the end, Africa will split. The world map will change. And life, as it always has, will adapt. The question is not whether we can stop it. The question is whether we are prepared to live on a planet that is always in motion.